Hi, I'm James from Chaosium. I sat down with Jason Dural the other day, and we spoke about tabletop role-playing game mechanics. Specifically, we spoke about when it's appropriate to deviate from the rules in order to improve the narrative flow of a game. I'm going to jump across to that interview in just a moment, but first, remember to subscribe to the Chaosium YouTube channel. It helps us out, and it lets us create more content like this. Thanks.
I frequently try to minimize the impact of rules on the narrative as much as possible. And by that, I will only call for, like in combats, if there's a combat whose outcome is almost foretold after a few rounds, it becomes obvious how it's going to go. I will even say, like, 2 or 3 bloody rounds of combat later, you find the rest of the rubble runners are dead. And, you're standing, you've got gore on your blade and on your shoes, but otherwise you're fine. Let's move on. And, I don't think it's absolutely necessary to go through every strike rank of every combat, of every round and go for that way. I'll frequently throw modifiers onto rolls that I think are important. Like just what do you call it? I call it the game master necessity roll. And sometimes I just, for something that somebody might want to roll for, rather than doing a roll, I'll just say, oh, that blah, this piece of information presents itself, like, rather than bogging down everyone with, like, oh, here's a lore roll to to figure out the secret for figuring out past the doorway. I'll just say, yeah, you realize that this is an old draconic script and it says this. I mean, like, what point is it to make the player characters at this point make a roll? Because if the fail result is the game stops, then that's not fun for anyone. And I mean, sometimes if I'll give a little extra, I may say, like, if you make the roll, you get a little more information. But I abuse the rules all the time. And I do so a lot more, I think, online, because, quite frankly, the experience of sitting looking at a screen and trying to manage, like, potentially overlapping conversations, I find that the online experience of gaming is a lot more, you really want to get a lot of bang for your buck and like, really pack the experience in. And if I'm sitting around a table, there are, like, snacks and nice drinks, and we're in a pleasant environment. In Germany, we play a lot in beer gardens, and so it's always a wonderful opportunity to just sort of relax and enjoy oneself. But if I find, we're sitting around a computer screen looking after, we've been, especially during the pandemic, we've been sitting at our computers for, like, long hours every day. I want to make sure that the RPG experience, that game playing is fun and feels rewarding. And, we don't generally do sessions as long. And so I would like to make them be as just, like, maximum reward for that time spent. So ignoring rules, bending rules, shortening sequences that could be drug out and longer. I find that really long tactical combat things, they don't really appeal to me. And as a result, I don't inflict them on my players. I recognize that there is an immense part of the market that loves that kind of stuff, and more power to them. But I find that I generally don't enjoy it that much. So I'm all too happy to foreshorten rules, just blow past sequences that are boring, and also allow auto successes for things that will push the game forward.
Are there any parts of game rules in which you find yourself to be kind of a stickler, in character creation or when dealing with death or anything like that?
That is a good question. I generally would prefer people not. I mean, if anything, I'm sort of ideologically opposed to min-maxing. And when I see characters that I think are very much like, oh, you're a big city lawyer, and yet you have a rifle skill of 95. How did that happen? And these kinds of things, like, certain game systems where it becomes, like, advantageous for everybody to take, like, reflex attack or some kind of crazy, feat or special ability, because it's just you know, by the mechanics of the game, it's senseless not to. And I find myself really looking down on that, and as a result, sort of shying away from systems that do so. And I mean, even little things like I always notice when people always position their stats, if there's a point by mechanic, all of their stats are like right at the edge where they get the bonus on. I'm like, I see what you did there. And, I do it myself on computer games, especially. You take a stat over and then it gives you a slightly better bonus. You're like, okay, next. Minimal effort for maximal reward. But generally, that's the only thing I really don't. I look askance at during character creation. But I also like to have characters feel like they are real, like they pick up smatterings of skills that might not be immediately useful, or they have to live in a world, so they might have professional skills that are absolutely of no use to the adventure itself, which I think is fine. And yeah, at the table, no, I don't think anything is sacred. I think the important thing is the experience of play, and the pleasure and the interaction between the players and the game master, the notion that you're trying to create this shared compelling experience. And if the rules are getting in the way, the rules should be broken or ignored.
So with that in mind, and talking about game settings that maybe try to force in play styles that you don't necessarily love, as somebody who is happy to break the rules, do you find yourself enjoying TTRPG systems that have very, very light rule mechanics? Things, like there's a trend that I notice in a lot of indie TTRPGs, particularly replacing statistics with just sort of verbs or nouns to give you kind of a flavor, and that real kind of more improvisational style of tabletop gaming.
Yes, I don't necessarily say I prefer them, but I play them a lot. I mean, currently right now, my local campaign, my physical humans in a single place campaign is Spire, which is pretty low mechanical complexity. I would have to go all the way back to the real beginning of my pen and paper RPG career to mention that I did a lot of work on Amber diceless role playing, which was dice free, and largely mechanics were compare two numbers and whichever is better, and whichever is better wins. And then, or whoever can make a more compelling reason why their slightly lower skill number is better than the other person's number is a success, which is almost entirely about role playing and negotiation. And so, I mean, that's really the crucible of where I started as a RPG designer, was working with that. And then I sort of branched into doing some stuff with various Chaosium IPs. I was and also, well, quite frankly, BRP. When I first came into BRP was on the lighter side. Stormbringer is and always, I think, will be my greatest love in RPGs, first edition. And other than a little bit of crunchiness with figuring out your skill category modifiers, it's really light. Special success or critical successes are 1/10 the skill roll done. There's a lot of it's a very fast play version of basic role playing. And as a result, when I've been working on Lords of the Middle Sea, I've kind of leaned back to that as an example of what kind of play complexity I want to see in a game.
Fantastic. One more question for you on that topic.
Sure.
How often do you as a GM, or how often are you forced to cheat a little bit, fudge a dice roll behind the screen, or is that a rule that you won't break as such?
Usually I find that if I'm not prepared to accept the outcome of a dice roll, I don't roll. And I mean, like, it's rare that I will say, okay, well, behind the scenes, and this is not like with the players, but if I'm not okay with a range of dead to lives, or whatnot, then I don't roll. I mean, I just have that be the narrative. You hit the guy with the sword. Does he parry? Is it important that he gets this one last parry in? Probably not. So you hit him. So there's a lot of times where I just I sort of speed through things. And again, I think that my at the table gaming style is quite different from my online gaming style. And there's a lot more facilitation of narrative through selective enforcement of rules, if that makes any sense.